Hey there, fellow nerds. Welcome to another episode of The Present Illness, the podcast where two physicians try to make sense of a world that's a little febrile and definitely underdiagnosed. I'm Arghavan Salles, a surgeon scientist and your friendly neighborhood doom scroller in residence.
I'm Alyssa Burgart, an anesthesiologist and bioethicist who tracks the news and health law cases like their EKGs, full of spikes and surprises, some of which might take us out if we don't pay attention. The Present Illness is where we dig into public health, politics, culture, and ethics with a scalpel in one hand and a meme in the other.
Huge thanks to everyone who's listening now, anyone who's subscribed, who's left reviews. We really, really appreciate that. It's very helpful. And some extra love to those who have subscribed and are following on various feeds. And a warm welcome to anyone who just stumbled in from reading that terrible trove of group chat messages that was published this week by Politico.
We are glad you are here, so let's get into it. And I am really excited. There was this clip that came through my social media feeds from a group called Pangburn, and they host these like discussions between people who disagree with each other. And so they're really trying to create these forums where people can get these ideas out in a public space and really debate the evidence. So the people who are in this video there's four people. So there's Dave Farina, who's Professor Dave Explains. He does science education. He's got a YouTube channel. He teaches chemistry and a bunch of other STEM subjects. And he does a lot of work debunking pseudoscience and really trying to promote critical thinking skills. And he has a master's in science education from my old stomping grounds, Cal State Northridge. I grew up down the street from there. And then Dr. Dan Wilson is a molecular biologist and does a bunch of science communication. He has a thing called Debunk the Funk with Dr. Wilson on YouTube and all the other channels. And he's specifically started his channel to debunk COVID-19 misinformation. So he started in 2020, still going strong. He's still talking about COVID. And his research outside of his social media stuff is based in ribosome biogenesis, which I would have to read more about to understand what that is in detail.
I do remember what ribosomes are, so I feel like that's a win.
Sure, for sure. As do I. But I also was like, wow, it's amazing the things you can get a PhD in, truly.
Well, science is advanced. That's for sure.
For sure. So then the two people that are so those are the two that are invited to this to talk about vaccine from their perspective, their science perspective. And then the two people who are on the other side of this debate are Steve Kirsch, who is a Silicon Valley entrepreneur. He did a bunch of tech investment. He invented some technology that had to do with the first optical mouse, when you use on a computer where we moved from having a roller ball under the mouse to having that little red light. So he did a bunch of work doing that. And then he became a philanthropist. And when COVID-19 started, he had this great idea. He invested in a bunch of COVID-19. He was trying to say, how can we find ways to treat COVID-19? Well, he became this huge critic of COVID-19 vaccines in particular and a ton of public health policy. So he's become very known in the COVID anti-vaccine movement. And he just really fell down the deep, dark well of vaccine misinformation. And then the other person who's in this is Dr. Pierre Corey, and he is a pulmonologist and critical care physician, and he co-founded one of the several major groups of COVID vaccine sort of whatever. And his group was called Frontline COVID-19 Critical Care Alliance, so FLCCC. There were a lot of these groups, more than I wish. But in particular, that was one of the groups that really pushed this idea for ivermectin, that you should take ivermectin and that was going to be this magical cure for COVID, which it is not. And there have been multiple studies, so much money invested to demonstrate that was not effective. We know that. So I am going to roll this clip so that I can see your reaction.
Can you tell me how all-cause mortality has dropped after they introduced the measles vaccine? Can you cite a study that looked at all-cause mortality of kids, showing that it dropped after they introduced the measles vaccine? Because I couldn't find one.
I sent you one. That was on the list of studies.
Didn't read it, did you?
I have.
Yeah. So let me describe it to you.
Should have.
So it was actually this is actually a really interesting story. So Measles vaccines were not rolled out at the same time in each country all around the world. They were rolled out in separate years, sometimes in separate decades. And 3 countries in the study, I think it's Denmark, Sweden, and the US, they looked at the time of rollout for the measles vaccine, and they saw a precipitous drop in all-cause mortality that was actually greater than what they would expect with just measles mortality going away. So scientists thought, oh, that's really interesting. Let's confirm that. The paper I sent you confirms that. It's a precipitous drop in all-cause mortality every single time, sometimes in a different decade, right after the measles vaccine was rolled out. And it was found that measles actually can infect your memory B and T cells. Do you know what the significance of that is?
Yeah.
No. Yeah?
Why don't you just keep talking?
Memory
We're not
B and
here
T.
to answer your questions.
If you
Make
know,
your
you can just say
argument.
yes and we can move on.
Just talk.
I will,
You have the
I will,
microphone, just talk.
I will continue to educate you. Sure, memory B and T cells are cellular immunity. Your immune system depends on these cells in order to create antibodies and exert cellular immunity against pathogens. So measles can infect these cells, and when the measles infects those cells, they die. They're either cleared by the immune system or they die off from the measles infection. So that means that these kids who are getting measles, their immune systems their memory is essentially getting wiped in a sense. And it's a phenomenon called immune amnesia that is well characterized now. It's characterized mechanistically based on what I just said. And that is an explanation as to why the all-cause mortality dropped further than what we would expect for just measles mortality in these countries that implemented the measles vaccine.
So that was the clip of this pang burn debate video. It's an hour and 45 minutes. So if you want to watch the whole thing, it's on YouTube. I will say it's a little stressful to watch people argue for an hour and 45 minutes, but I did that heroic work. And it's frustrating, right? And you and I have talked about this. I do not believe that people who, like regular people out in the public who believe vaccine misinformation, I do not want to make fun of those people. I do not want to disparage them in any way because everyone's like doing their best with the information and the expertise that they have access to.
Absolutely.
What I do have a problem with is people like Pierre Corey and people like Steve Kirsch who have made it their mission to disparage every vaccine. And you can see in that clip, right? Like Steve Kirsch openly admits he didn't read the study that was sent to him ahead of time. So these two groups had an opportunity to send each other the data they were likely to cite.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And there's a different portion of the video, for example, where I forget if it was Corey or if it was Kirsch, but they're throwing out all these numbers and saying like, well, obviously this is what this means. And when the folks who have more skepticism around science and clearly more skills around statistical analysis ask them like, okay, well, what confounders were controlled for in that study? And they're like, the association is so obvious. You don't have to think about associations. You don't have to think about confounders. And I'm like, that's not how statistics work. I mean, there's a really old book that I reread recently called How to Lie with Statistics. And it's because there's all of these ways that, there's something like p-value hacking or all these other mechanisms to take science and try to make the results say what you want them to say. And it is very frustrating to watch these two anti-vaccine advocates use such spurious data and then also not be willing to engage with data that impacts their or goes against what they already believe.
Well, I mean, I think this is such a common thing that we see among people who are peddling disinformation. And, if we think back just a week ago, when RFK Jr. was talking about Tylenol and autism, he said, we don't have the evidence yet to prove that Tylenol causes autism, but we're going to, I believe he said, make the evidence. Which is like also not how science is done. We don't have a claim and then set out to prove that claim. We have a question and then we try to find the answer to that question. Like, does the measles vaccine have does it lower all-cause mortality, right? That's the question they're trying to answer in that clip. Or does the COVID vaccine decrease transmission? Does the COVID vaccine decrease hospitalization, et cetera, right? These are the questions. We don't, as scientists, set out to say, we're going to prove that it does XYZ thing or that it doesn't do XYZ thing. And that's where people who don't have any scientific training often get held up because they don't understand. And when RFK Jr. had made that comment, a lot of people I saw online were saying, "Wow, he just like said it right there." And I said, "Yeah, he said it because he doesn't think it's problematic. That's how he views science. He thinks it's normal to say we're going to make evidence to support our claim." Which obviously, again, is not how science works. But one of the things I picked up on in this clip was when the pro-science folks were like, "Do you know about memory B cells? Do you know what T cells are?" Which, for our audience, for non-medical folks, like these are two major arms of our immune system. And our immune system is incredibly complex. But to just even know that B and T cells exist is something you would learn probably in like a college biology type class. And the silence from these people, Corey and Kirsch, reflects that they don't even know what those are. And to be sitting there talking about what kind of immune response a vaccine has or what potential benefits a vaccine might have without even knowing what a B or a T cell is pretty stunning to me.
Well, and what's even more stunning, like, Steve Kirsch not knowing the answer to that question is not as surprising to me. Pierre Corey's a doctor, an intensive care doctor. And he had nothing, no answer.
Well, isn't that fascinating?
I mean, it made no sense. I remember the very first time I heard this clip, again, I wasn't surprised that Steve Kirsch had nothing to say. I thought Pierre Corey would say something. But nothing, no. And even his facial expression, when you watch the clip, I was like, bro, is there anything going on in there? I don't think so.
Are the synapses synapsing? Is something happening? I mean,
well,
I think
and
that
the
point,
thing.
Go ahead. Mm-hmm.
Well, I was just going to say one of the things about Pierre Corey that I think is also very relevant. I mentioned earlier that he's one of the people who really peddled ivermectin, which caused a lot of harm in this country. There's a huge amount of people who, for example, when they couldn't get ivermectin through appropriate safe channels, instead started using it from veterinary areas. People overdosed on it, and it doesn't do anything to treat COVID, which is sad. I wish that had been different. That would have been so great if that had been true, but it wasn't.
Yeah.
But Pierre Corey made a fuck ton of money because their group, FLCCC, even though they say that they are a nonprofit, like they absolutely worked to get telehealth access to this and made a lot of money off of a lot of people who were desperate for something that was not a vaccine because they'd been told that the COVID-19 vaccine was terrible. They were told that it was going to kill them. They were told all sorts of things. And just like we have talked about in terms of folks online using their fame, using their influence to cause these issues, it is to make money.
Yeah. And the nice thing, if you're on that side of things, the nice thing about ivermectin is you can buy it in large volumes for pretty little money because it's used for veterinary care quite frequently. And so you can buy a giant vat of ivermectin and you can package it in smaller packages that would be more appropriate for human doses if it were for indications for which it's appropriate. And then you can sell it to people and make a lot of money off of it, even though it's not really going to benefit those folks in the case of COVID, which is what they were and are continuing to try to sell it for. And I think that this clip, what's really interesting about this clip too, is that it shows a complete lack of understanding of the science. It's not that they read the article and disagreed, right, with what I don't even know how you could with that specific question disagree with the outcome, but they hadn't even bothered to read the article. And there was this clip, I don't know if folks saw Cheryl Hines RFK Jr.'s wife, was on The View earlier this week. I believe she has a book. I'm not sure. I don't know what it's called. I'm not trying to sell it. I have or promote it in any way, just to be clear. But Cheryl Hines went on The View, and they asked her about her husband and his qualifications for being the head of the Health and Human Services, and she
Bobby.
chose Bobby. Yes, she very
Bobby.
interesting. She very interestingly chose to bring up an example from the early part of the pandemic, in 2021, and she said, "Look, they said, they being like the scientific and medical establishment, they said that the vaccine was going to stop transmission of COVID, and Bobby questioned it. That's all he did was say, 'Show me the science.' And there was no science," she says. And then they I think she says they censored him. I think that's what comes after that, which obviously, like, the man is head of HHS. I don't think that's what censorship is. It's like the people who talk about someone being canceled when they're like on your TV every day and so clearly haven't been canceled. But what I want to say, the reason I brought it up is the part where she said there was no science. And that is a blatant lie. I mean, there are multiple studies that have looked at whether any of the various COVID vaccines decrease transmission. And to give grace to the public health folks who were trying to manage this ever changing landscape and quickly changing landscape back in 2020 and 2021, the early studies did show that the COVID vaccines were pretty good at decreasing transmission with the alpha variant. The problem came that the alpha variant didn't stick around very long. And then we had Delta and we had Omicron and so on. And its effectiveness, the various vaccines, their effectiveness on transmission decreased with later variants. And this is how disinformation can really flourish, because we take a situation where it was true at one point. And so what was said at that point in time was relatively true. And then things changed, and there may not have been, to be fair, I think there may not have been as clear communication around, oh, now we have new information that suggests maybe it's not as good for transmission. Somewhere along the way, we got to this place where we are now, which is a recognition that the vaccines don't seem to stop transmission, but they are very effective for decreasing hospitalization and death from COVID, right? So that's kind of where we settled after we had a lot of time to study and look at the data and see how these things play out and look at the different variants. But for someone like her to say that there was no science around transmission when there were many, many studies, by the way, open access in places like the New England Journal. You don't have to search very hard to find these. In fact, when I looked myself to be like, what is she talking about? It only took a few minutes to find multiple studies with the exact data that she said did not exist. And that's very similar. I was reminded of it because of these guys in this clip who were like, oh, show me the data. And with measles, I mean, it's even more wild to say that about measles, because obviously the measles vaccine has been studied ad nauseum in every kind of possible way one could think of to study it. And for them to say, oh, you can't show me that it affects mortality is, well, like, fascinating.
And to your point as well, there's also what I've seen is, and Pierre Corey at the very beginning of this debate actually has says that he thinks that all vaccines are a problem. He doesn't think that anyone should get any vaccines. So there's also this, information that is around that these two people became anti-vaccine celebrities, if you will, related to COVID.
Mhm.
And seeing the massive rise of that disinformation and which at the beginning I think was very likely in good faith. I think that
Mhm.
the concerns were not necessarily so horrible at the beginning, but my goodness, did they ramp up. And it's so, as someone who takes care of children, it's just so frustrating. Um I take care of, we still have a lot of course we do. We have a lot of kids whose parents and grandparents died during
Mhm.
COVID. Um, we have healthcare workers who died, and many, 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 many people, including children with long COVID. And so it's frustrating when it is more profitable to spread the story you like than it
Mhm.
is to engage in scientific evidence in good faith and to ask good faith questions and make sure that that research gets funded and make sure that we're able to answer those questions by using real science.
Yeah, and they're taking advantage of people's very real and valid concerns, right? Especially when you're talking about this specific context of vaccination, which mostly were, aside from COVID, we're talking about childhood vaccinations usually. So people obviously are very protective of their children, as they should be. And so they're thinking about, I don't know, what are the risks here? And they have in one ear, they're hearing all this disinformation saying that these vaccines aren't safe or that they cause specific medical problems and they don't solve whatever problem they say they're supposed to solve. There's all these different myths that folks like these guys like to promote. And when you don't have a country that has certainly not a high medical literacy, not a high scientific literacy, and honestly, just not a high literacy in general, it's very hard for them to parse this information. And I can't remember, I think you and I have talked about this before, but not on the podcast that I recall. Um, if you're looking at doing nothing, which is like, I'm going to not vaccinate my child, I'm going to do nothing versus doing something, the doing something feels like it has more risk than doing nothing, right? It feels like you're taking an action that maybe you didn't have to take, which is just like a cognitive bias that we have as humans, that doing nothing feels like it's less risky. But when you're talking about vaccines where we have decades of data showing their benefit for these childhood vaccines, the doing nothing actually is more risky. Right. And we're seeing this now with the largest measles outbreak in this country that we've had in many, many years. And we're on the verge of losing our measles elimination status because of it. And I think it's that idea of like, I don't know what's right for my child. There are these people telling me that these terrible things might happen if I vaccinate my child. So I will just do nothing, even though, and of course they don't realize this, but the doing nothing actually is taking on more risk than having vaccinated their child.
Yeah, absolutely. And since you're bringing up the number of measles cases, I just
Mm,
figured I would take just a little moment. If you are thinking about the MMR vaccine, if you end up watching this video, they talk a lot about measles. They talk about a
mm,
bunch of other different vaccines as well. We are at almost 1,600 cases in the United States in 2025. So as of just a couple days ago, 1,596 cases. And 27% of that is in kids under 5, and
mhm,
almost 40% is in people 5 years old to 19 years old.
mhm,
And 92% of those cases are in people who are unvaccinated or have an unknown vaccination status.
mhm,
And as as is consistent with past outbreaks, there are 44 outbreaks this year in the United
mm,
States. And the index one is the one started in Gaines, Texas.
mhm,
Um, and there have been 3 deaths. It's got a 12% hospitalization rate, which is pretty consistent with past major outbreaks. There's also a huge outbreak in Canada. There's
mhm.
also
Yep.
there's also a big outbreak in Chihuahua, Mexico, which was transported there from Texas. So those are connected. This is a big deal. And wear a mask, folks.
Yeah, I mean,
There's you should update.
I agree. And back to, yes, you should up to your vaccines if you need to. If you haven't been vaccinated, I mean, again, our podcast is not medical advice, but you should talk to your medical provider. Um, and masks, a lot of times I find myself wondering, what if we had managed the mask conversation differently especially in 2021? And this is why I always say, if I'm seen as defending, the medical establishment, it's not without criticism. There are things that I believe we did right, that we got right, and there are things that I think, in retrospect, it's easy to see, from my perspective anyway, that we should have handled differently. And the masking is one, and it was because of those data on the transmission that looked like the vaccine was really good at decreasing transmission. And so recommendations from public health officials were that we didn't need to wear masks anymore. And when it became clear that that wasn't going to be true for the later variants, I think because of the political situation and the social context, and I don't know what else, I wasn't in the rooms where those decisions were made, but they did not make a strong and clear communication that masks actually were still really important. And I mention that because I do wonder if we had higher rates of masking now, even with fewer people getting vaccinated or vaccinating the children for measles, would we be seeing as many cases now this year as we are? Imagine if we still had universal masking like we did in early 2020. I find it hard to imagine that we would have so many cases right now of measles. But we can't go back in time, obviously, and what happened has happened. But for folks listening, measles is transmitted via respiratory route. And so wearing an N95 mask or equivalent when you're out and about, especially in areas where there's an outbreak, but honestly, really anywhere, is protective.
Yeah, and measles is so incredibly infectious, and it hangs around in the air for 2 hours.
Yep.
2 hours.
And you can't see it. You can't see it. You can't smell it. Just hanging out there. You walk into an empty elevator. You have no reason to suspect there's anything funny in that air, but you have no idea who was in that elevator right before you, or right before them, or right before them, right? I mean, it's a real problem. And I'm 45. I got my measles, mumps, and rubella titer levels checked a couple years ago because I was traveling at the time. I was traveling to Florida, and there was an outbreak in Florida, and I had to go for work. And so I went and got my titers checked. And for me, my measles and I think I'm probably going to get this wrong, but you don't have my health record, so you can't fact check me. 2 of the 3 were fine. But one of them,
2 out of 3 ain't bad.
Yeah, I think it was rubella that was low. But it could have been mumps. It wasn't measles is the point. My measles was actually okay, but either my mumps or my rubella titer were low. And so I actually just got another shot of the MMR just like 2 years ago. For adults, again, this is not medical advice, but just I don't think it's wrong to get a titer checked and see, especially for people who are older than us, but even people of kind of roughly our age group. Especially if you're going to be in an area where there's an outbreak or you live in an area where there is one.
Absolutely. I had to get mine updated too. My, rubella, I for some reason don't maintain very good immunity, so I had to have that redone, especially before I had kids, because congenital rubella syndrome is terrible. And recently I had my measles, my primary care doctor, because she is smart, she was like, you work with kids. We should make sure that you are immune. And so, yeah, we updated my vaccine as well. And, you can just, there's guidance on, based on when you got vaccinated, how likely it is that you need to update it. And I would say that, if you're in your 40s, it's for sure makes sense to have that checked.
Yeah.
Or older, obviously.
Right.
All right. I think we should talk about something else. What do you want to talk about?
Yes, this is going to be a little whiplashy, but
okay. I'm here for it.
Compared to that conversation, quite the shift. But there's a lot going on this week, as there has been every week in 2025. But I thought we could talk about a clip, which is from a podcast, and it's a pastor sharing his opinion. So, are we able to roll the clip?
Yeah. What is this guy's name? Do you know?
I don't know. I used to know, but I didn't double check.
We'll look it up. Well, probably needed to repress that memory based on what I know we're about to hear. All right, here, let's roll the clip.
It's a woman who ordinarily, according to created order and the way that God has designed women, that she would aspire towards beauty, and not just external, but internal, and that chiefly described as, a gentle and quiet spirit, and rather she would She would forsake that and embrace being a loud woman. All right. So what are the causes? One is a lack of accountability for women, which we absolutely have had for decades. A complete and utter lack of accountability for women has caused them to be loud. But here's another one. Women in the public sphere.
Oh. That was not
I
where
just
thought
got to
you
be
were going with
honest.
that.
We can't just pretend that it's a lack of accountability, that it's like, oh, well, there's all these women, who are on public platforms and they're speaking, and they're doing this and they're doing that. And it's just the fact that we don't acknowledge that women have faults and the fact that we never speak about their sin and that we never hold them accountable. No, they shouldn't be speaking, period.
Well, isn't that fun? I mean,
Do not like.
so,
That's gonna be
so
a big
much,
thumbs down for me.
so much,
You know,
so much to
I was
process.
just. I don't know about you, Arghavan. I do not think that we have gentle or quiet spirits, and I don't think we ever have. Ever.
The two of us? No, I don't think
No.
But
No.
okay, the reason I wanted to share this clip is not because it's absurd. I mean, it is absurd, but this is becoming more of a mainstream position with, in particular, folks who are in our current government, many of them ascribing to very similar values as to what was described in here. And I that to me, as an independent woman, as a woman who has my own career, as a woman who has no problem being loud and doesn't see that as a problem, as a woman who sees not just accountability, but harassment of women all the time. I mean, I don't know what that part was about how women aren't held accountable for whatever our issues are. I mean, anyone who's been online for about 20 seconds can see that any woman who posts almost anything online is immediately getting pushback, whether it's a photo and they're telling her she should have had bigger eyes or a smaller nose or a different hair color, or maybe her forehead's too big or right? Like anything about the physical appearance. If it's an opinion, it's that obviously you are dumb and you don't know what you're talking about because you're just a silly little woman. I mean, there's so much evidence around this that's silly that I even have to say it. But he said, yeah, I think what he said was, we don't acknowledge that women have faults. And I was like, as a woman who has lived on the internet for years, I would really, really strongly disagree that that's a problem that we have in our society. In fact, I think that we spend far too much time identifying faults in women in ways that we often don't do, by the way, for men. Like if we look at leadership, and even when we think about our profession in medicine, people are very quick to find fault with women leaders, with women physicians, and not so much so with men. And I do think we should look at everyone critically, right? Like, especially if we're talking about medicine and we have people's lives in our hands, of course, we want to make sure that we're all doing the best that we can. But there was a study that came out, I think it was in 2017. I could be like a couple years off on that. But a woman named Heather Sarsons wrote this article looking at what happens to referrals to surgeons and based on the outcomes of those patients after the referrals. And there's a lot of really interesting stuff in her paper. And the reason I'm bringing it up and it's relevant to this conversation is she talks about when patients are referred to a surgeon and then that patient has an unexpected bad outcome. And we all know there are rates of complications. Anyone who does surgery, any surgeon, if you're operating, you're going to see complications in your patients. That's just part of the profession. But she looked specifically at when there were unexpected bad outcomes, what happened to referral patterns from those referring physicians. And what she found, again, was lots of interesting things, but one thing I want to just point out is she found for when people had referred a patient to a woman surgeon and a patient had an unexpected bad outcome, those referring physicians decreased their referrals to all women surgeons after that. When they referred to a man surgeon and that patient had an unexpected bad outcome, as you can imagine, because of what I already said before this, there was not that change where they were all of a sudden not referring to men surgeons anymore. And there's examples of this in lots of different professions, but women's mistakes when we make them, especially when we're in male-dominated fields, are actually punished to a greater extent than our men's mistakes. So that part was like really particularly laughable to me, that we don't acknowledge women have faults because, again, not only is this happening all day, every day, in every sphere. If you think about, by the way, any woman who has a public presence, any woman, whether it's an actress, it's a musician, it's a politician, you can, in a 2-second search, find numerous examples of people writing about that person's flaws, even though they have maybe nothing to do with the job that the person has or their profession or their work. Because again, this is, I would say, one of the things our society is extremely good at, actually, is finding faults in women. But
Do
the
you know
more
what we're
important,
not? Do you know what we're
yeah, go
not
ahead.
good at, though?
What?
We're not good at holding men accountable.
Well,
I mean, I thought that's, to me, the part that I laughed at so hard. Maybe
mhm.
laughed is the wrong word, but like the idea that, like, well, we just need to hold women accountable. And I'm like, well, but like, what about if we like held men accountable for the amount of violence that is done to women? Like, I mean, just that. Like, what are we talking about here? That makes no sense.
Yep. Yeah, I'm not even sure what. I mean, it's a fair question to be like, what flaws did he even talking about? Was he talking about being loud as a flaw, or having a job as a flaw, or being existing in public? Is that what he considers a flaw? And I think it's like very timely that you mentioned what you just did, because we have in the background of our last few weeks, or actually last few months of conversations, even before we launched this podcast, is what's happening with the Epstein files, right? Where the government, the same people who had previously promised transparency, radical transparency, Pam Bondi saying the files were on her desk and she was going to release them as soon as they had redacted everything. Then all of a sudden doing a 180 saying, no, actually there are no files. There's nothing to release. And meanwhile, we have survivors who are lobbying very hard after decades saying we deserve justice here. We deserve accountability. Why is the government not protecting and supporting us? Why are we, decades later, having to come to Washington, D.C. and make speeches about the need for holding, to your point, violent men accountable? And we have right now a woman who's been elected in a special election in Arizona as a representative, who Mike Johnson, the Speaker of the House, refuses to swear in so that she can assume her responsibility. And it is known, because she has said it herself, that she will sign that discharge. I forget what the second word is, but the bill that they've been working on, or the effort they've been working on to cause the files to be released, that she would be the 218th, I believe it is, person to vote for it, which means the files would, from the House, then need to be released. And so he's avoiding swearing her in, I'm sure for multiple reasons, but many feel that that is a primary reason that he won't let her take her position.
Well, we have to hold women accountable for the votes that we think they'll.
Yes, because being loud is such a crime somehow. I mean, one of the things there's so much that this clip brought up for me, but one of them is that there are a number of, and you see examples of this all over social media, of men who say that they are attracted to women, who have relationships with women they clearly do not like, and in some cases seem to very much hate, actually. And it's not clear that those men would like or respect any woman. Maybe they would. I don't know. Maybe they're just with the wrong person for them. But when you are slamming your bride's face into a wedding cake when she's asked you not to do that because it's her wedding day and she paid a lot of money for that makeup and for that dress and she doesn't want it ruined, and then you do it anyway. Or when you are holding up your vows at your wedding ceremony, on the backside you've written in by hand, "Help me," in large letters. When you are, again, doing your vows and you are talking about your soon-to-be wife only in terms of sexual behaviors and specific behaviors in front of all your friends and family to humiliate her, these are not signs that you like or respect that person. And so when this clip reminds me of that, because it seems like this guy, who I'm assuming, I did not look it up, I'm assuming he has a wife.
So
But
I looked him up while we were talking. His name is Joel Webben. He is a pastor, and he runs something called Right Response Ministries. It's gross.
Does it say if he's married?
No, but I'll look.
Okay. But I assume he probably is. But you'll let me know in a second. And I don't understand how someone, and there are multiple men like this, who holds views like this would marry a woman, because he clearly does not like or respect women or feel that women have anything to contribute aside from perhaps bearing children, which is a not uncommon view amongst certain circles, which again are in proximity to the leaders of our government right now. And I'll pause in just a moment to hear what you found, but this reminds me of this other pastor who, in the summer, there was a clip that circulated about him. His name is Doug Wilson, because he was saying that women shouldn't vote. And our Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth, had reposted. So it's not just like a random person saying this stuff. It's a person who our Secretary of Defense reposted saying that women shouldn't have the right to vote. We have this in the context of the SAVE Act, which again failed to pass. It's been proposed multiple times, and the whole idea of this act is basically to disenfranchise women. And we can talk about it in more detail if we want. But that has come up multiple times, most recently this year. And that's what it's about. It's a blatant effort to disenfranchise women. This Doug Wilson guy, I'm pretty sure, was also the person who had said only one person per household, essentially the husband of a heterosexual pairing, should vote for the whole family. That's who should have the right to vote.
All right. I'm going to tell you what I found out about Pastor Joel Webben, okay?
Okay, great.
You will not be surprised. Yes, he is married. Spoiler alert, he also has daughters.
Yeah.
So that's cool. I feel bad for them.
Yeah.
But get this. So he thinks that women who make false allegations of rape, which you and I know there is an entire population of people who believe that rape does not exist and that it is all allegations of rape are false, for lots of horrible reasons. He thinks that should be punishable by death.
Oh, sure.
So he said that would end the Me Too movement immediately. He also, like the other guy you talked about, doesn't think women should vote. Because again, I mean, we're supposed to have, I believe he called it a gentle and quiet spirit. Really just, shouldn't you be home cooking and raising the children, letting your mind melt away quietly? Be quiet about it as you let your spirit fucking die. Obviously, there are people who love being homemakers, who love being home raising their children, and I applaud you. It is not for everyone. It is sure as heck not for me. Mm-hmm. So he has also, and this is in relation to medicine, he has on a podcast claimed that Black doctors didn't have to pass medical exams. Like what? Like claiming that somehow they just sailed in. That's the only way that we have any doctors who are Black. I mean, the audacity to claim such a thing is ridiculous.
Well, the ignorance. I mean, the ignorance. But how you could only say such a thing if you have really no idea how medical training works and how board certification works and how medical licensing works. And if you're extremely racist, you have to have that too.
And you have to, I mean, that's really the core of Christian nationalism is you have to be really fucking racist.
Yeah. And this guy, he's right there. He did it. Check. I had a little bit of a technical issue, so I'm not sure if you heard me when I was saying that Doug Wilson, I believe, is the person or one of the people who also thinks that only the head of the household, meaning the man in a heterosexual partnership, should vote for the whole family. That's how he thinks it should work.
Well, you know, I believe that
thinks it should work, and I believed. Wait, I'm so sorry. I did not catch that. Well, I believe J.D. Vance also endorsed this view.
What's funny to me is that, like, that is exactly the argument that kept women from getting the right to vote for so many years, is that was the belief. Like, why would you need those little women to vote? They're just going to vote the same way as their husbands. Please. As though we don't have, like, our own fucking ideas about what we want for representation.
Well, and it is a real struggle. And I want to correct myself. I don't recall if JD Vance actually said that about the head of the household, but what he did say was that basically you should get more votes if you have more children. Like your household should get more votes if you have more children as a way of incentivizing people to have children. But um, to your point about being, obviously, we are independent people with our own thoughts, but voting coercion is a major challenge that is experienced in partnerships, in particular in partnerships where if it's a heterosexual partnership, the man is conservative and women may have different views from their partner and have difficulty because either the man will watch them as they fill out their ballot or threaten them about how they need to vote. Or, I mean, there's a lot of different ways this plays out for people. And so we already don't all have truly the right to vote the way that we want because of coercion and abuse that happens in a lot of these relationships. Um, and it's very clear, like it's not ambiguous at all, that a big part of the conservative agenda right now is figuring out how to make it so fewer women can vote, and soon. And we have at the same time, part of the reason I wanted to talk about this isn't just one guy saying this thing. It's part of a coordinated, in many ways, movement, including the rise of this, you kind of alluded to, trad wife content of look at me baking Oreo cookies from scratch for my husband, and look at me on this farm taking care of my children. And one of the things that many people have pointed out with that I think is really insightful is none of the people we're seeing making this kind of content are trad wives. They have a job. Their job is making content, and they are making a lot of money making that content. But the myth that they're selling you is that they don't have a job. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah,
Not that homemaking
it's
isn't
the
a job. Obviously,
performance.
homemaking is work. But
Absolutely.
they're trying to sell this image of all I do is to take care of my home and take care of my children. But the fact that you can even see it at all is evidence that I actually have another job, which is creating this for you to sell this idea to you. And we see it coming up even in somewhat unexpected places, like Taylor Swift's latest album, where she references, it's not wrong to want to be married in any way. And, I hope that she's very happy with her fiance and so on. But she kind of references this idea of just wanting to be married and to have kids and wanting to have a neighborhood full of children who look like him, which is problematic for, a lot of reasons that I don't think is relevant to us today necessarily. But even someone like her who, she's in her mid-30s, she's obviously extraordinarily successful, has been a very independent woman. She is very loud, to that pastor's chagrin, I'm sure. I mean, even the president of the United States has insulted her on national television. Um, and even she is kind of, in a more subtle way, also pushing this kind of trad wife angle. I mean, I don't know that she would say that, but that's how I take at least what I'm seeing about what was said on the album. In full disclosure, I have not listened to it because I have not seen anything that makes me think I would like it. Um, Even though I've listened to multiple of her previous albums, 50s out there, please don't come after me. I like her enough. I've bought music. I just haven't listened to this last album. Um, but my point
I
is,
love
it's
how
this.
I love how of all the people you're worried are going to come after you, it's the Swifties.
Oh, girl, have you ever pissed off the Swifties? No, I'm serious. Has
Oh
it
no,
happened to you?
I would never
Oh,
go
I did.
near that.
So I know the wrath, even though I just tasted a tiny bit of it. I know the wrath of the Swifties. I am not trying to take down Taylor Swift. All I was just wanting to point out is that some of what I hear is in that album connects to this larger social and political movement, which is an effort to restrict women's presence in the public sphere and to turn back time in a lot of ways and to take us out of leadership roles. I mean, you heard him say it. He doesn't want women in the public sphere. So take us out of the public eye so that the rightful leaders who have other sets of chromosomes can take their rightful place in taking charge of the world and leading us into deeper and deeper levels of hell. But anyway, that's the big issue that that made me want to talk about this clip, because it's not just this one guy, it's not just two guys, it's people in our federal government, and it's a large social movement that is gaining momentum. And I want people to be aware of that, because you know that I'm very deep into the weeds on a lot of these things in a way that not everyone is. And it's really, really disturbing to me. When you talk about, the last thing I'm going to say about this is the death penalty you mentioned earlier. There is a bill in South Carolina that proposes to punish a woman who has an abortion with the death penalty. And so this is not what you found from Joel Webben, is not, even in that respect, is not a one-off either. There are a lot of people who are angry that women can be president, not in this country apparently, but in other countries, that women can be CEOs, that women can be billionaires, that women can command large audiences like Sabrina Carpenter, yes, Taylor Swift, Beyonce, Chappell Rowan. You know, genuinely, this angers a lot of people, and a lot of those people are banding together to say, okay, how do we stop this progress? And we need to be, as women, and you and I as feminist women, as women professionals, I think we really need to be paying attention to what is happening. Obviously, there's so much happening, but this is really, really important. And the concertedness also, by the way, like, or the parallels, or maybe I don't know exactly what the right word is that I'm thinking of, but this is not happening in isolation from the reproductive rights restrictions, right? That's all part of it. The fact that so many states in this country have now banned abortion, the fact that so many states in this country still allow child marriage, the fact, I mean, there's just, we could go on for days, but there's a lot of different parts of this movement that all together are trying to make sure that our voices are not heard. And that's really disturbing.
Yeah, I mean, this is part of, Christian nationalism, and I think for um those of us who spent a lot of time in particular conservative religions, and there's different criticisms of different Christian religions, and this concept that like women do not have a place in leadership and women do not have a place um in which we express opinions and question authority. This is really deeply embedded in that movement and in certain branches of Christianity. And we're seeing, in the data that you and I looked at previously on, for example, young men in particular right now are like this real growing area that is believing these things, that is believing that this is the way. And so I think it tells you how much of a threat women are to people in these groups. I mean, the idea
Hmm.
that like women, and it's also this like false use of the idea of natural, like what is natural and what is
Yeah.
good.
Hmm.
And we can
Hmm.
talk more in the future about different kinds of assumptions that are made about who gets to be like what based on things we claim are natural, and that we claim that if it's natural it's good, and we claim that we understand, we ascribe social things as inherently part of who we are. And
Hmm. Oh, no, sorry. I was just going to say, related to gender, obviously that's true, but also a lot of this, like, what's natural conversation comes up among people who are homophobic and transphobic as a justification for why they think other people should not have human rights. And not only are they wrong about what's natural, but also, a lot of, I think what you're trying to say is, a lot of what we think of as natural is actually socially constructed. It's made up. It's made
yeah,
up by
it's the
us when we're
naturalistic
talking about it.
fallacy.
When we're talking about it in our society, there's natural, like what actually exists, say, in the animal kingdom, but I don't think that's what people are usually talking about when they're talking about, like, women should be, quiet and subservient because that's what we naturally are, or whatever. That's socially constructed. Or trans people shouldn't exist. That's a violation of some law of nature. But that's not true either. Like, trans people have always existed. Trans people will always exist. And this is just some line that you're using to convince people who are, honestly confused and less informed, that there's something bad happening here, because people are wanting to express themselves in a way that feels appropriate for them.
Yeah, and this is a good just a callback to our earlier discussion about vaccination. Is it, some of the since vaccines, the very first vaccine from Edward Jenner back in the day, the arguments against vaccination were from a religious perspective, and it had to do with this idea that it's unnatural, it is an offense to God, and so we really see these same arguments recycled again and again, and that's a really that it's such an interesting connection, the way that um, ultra Christian conservatism, the way that Christian nationalism really is touching on almost every aspect of modern life, and as you've mentioned, continues to grow in popularity, which is very, very scary. Um, Although I have really been enjoying the countercultural narratives online. So there's I think it's William Spreck has been doing a hilarious string of videos where he dresses up as Jesus, and he has this like long blonde wig, and he's got the crown of thorns, and he's wearing a robe, and he's doing like admissions evaluations for people as they try to get into heaven. And the one I saw recently was like interviewing ICE agents, interviewing the president, interviewing various political figures. And it's really interesting the way that he is calling attention to, like, what are the things that Jesus is ascribed to have actually stood for, according to the Bible and according to other things, versus how is it that those things are being twisted to control people in our society. And I am terrified of Christian nationalism, but I have really gotten a lot of joy out of those videos.
Well, and it reminds me of, I don't know if you saw this clip. There's a clip of Trump. I think it was earlier this week. I mean, what is time? It might have been last week, but I think it was this week. Where he said, I don't think I'm gonna get into heaven. I think I'm not gonna make it. That's after he has previously multiple times alluded to his desire to get into heaven, and somehow when this reporter asked him more recently, he just came out with he was like, "Yeah, I think that's not in the cards for me." And I was like, "Wow, a moment of lucidity and insight that we're not used to hearing from this man." So you're right, sir. And other people were like, "This is terrifying because that means." He has no reason to restrict his behavior if he truly has that insight that he's not going to make it into heaven. So
Who
what do we have?
who thought he was restricting his behavior before?
Well, because he did say, when he was talking about his aspirations to the Nobel Peace Prize and so on, he had a lot of and he's done this actually throughout his career. I think, like, fluffing himself up and trying to paint himself as this like wonderful ethical figure. And I don't know, yeah, to your point, whether he was restricting any of his innermost desires at all. But this was the concern that was raised by some was, wow, now that he seems to have really figured out he has no chance of getting into heaven, like, what's in store for us now? What new horrors shall we see? And I don't know, but we will surely find out.
Well, I think that is a great way to wrap up the show. Arghavan, what is bringing you joy this week?
Okay, if people follow me on Blue Sky, you've already seen that I posted about this, but there is something called the Pizza Wars happening on TikTok, and it is bringing me a lot of joy. It's people who work at mostly places like Domino's and Papa Joe's, like chain pizza places, but also some who work at kind of like fancier pizza places. But they're playing Rihanna's Umbrella, and they are throwing pizza dough around in like miraculous ways that I did not know were possible. I mean, they're like throwing it behind them and around, and there's like flour just flying everywhere. One of them actually has a person holding an umbrella. A couple of them that I saw, they've put the pizza, the pizza delivery case that has like the insulation that they will like pull the pizza out of when they deliver it to your house. They have put that case over their heads. They're blind doing it. They're throwing the pizza dough around, and I don't know how they do it, behind their back and all sorts of stuff with their face fully covered is incredible. And so it's called the Pizza Wars, but they're not really in competition. They're just like all doing amazing things with pizza dough. And I'm like, well, if I can just like get it in the oven, I'm good, So anyway, I would highly recommend that folks check out the Pizza Wars, and we can put a link to I posted, I think, 3 or 4 of the videos on my Blue Sky because I'm just like so blown away by these people and their like prowess with pizza dough.
That's amazing. And, I won't lie, that's like a secret desire of mine is to learn how to throw pizza dough. When I was a little kid in Los Angeles, our family friends owned an Italian restaurant. They were an Italian family. And I remember seeing them throwing the pizza dough back in the kitchen and being like, that is what I want to do with my life. I mean, I ended up becoming a doctor,
I
but
tried it.
one day
I tried it.
might.
I tried it once or twice, like with like genuinely, like I was like, I can do. No, I could not. I could not. I genuinely have no idea how they do it, how they're not poking holes in it every time. Because you will see, you should watch. You will see. The dough is not very thick, but they're like, anyway, yeah, I highly recommend.
Love seeing people who build a skill. Love that.
Yeah, super highly skilled. What's bringing you joy this past week?
Oh, so I know I just talked about William Spark, but there's this other guy who does videos where all he does is do lip syncing to Trump's statements.
Oh,
But
yeah,
he
yeah,
does it
yeah.
in a funny way. Yeah. And there's one that I saw, and Trump said some truly unhinged things about hepatitis B vaccine that you and I should talk about another time. He has this video where he's saying the things that Trump said about the hepatitis B vaccine, but in the character of a teenage girl who is unprepared for class and has like a book report or
Mhm.
something.
Yeah.
And it is hilarious. And that gave
Well,
me
'cause that's
great
what he
joy
sounds like.
despite the
That's what he
horrors.
sounds like. A totally
And
unprepared. Actually, he sounds
that's our
less prepared than a teenage girl going to do a presentation in school, to be honest.
I don't know. I want the presidency to be smart again. I just I want the president to seem like somebody who knows what they're fucking talking about. Please.
I mean, would you I don't know if you agree, but I also would like the press secretary to not say your mom in response to a question asked by the press. So I think you and I can both dream for now. Maybe that'll be a thing that happens in the future. But that's it for this week's episode. If you didn't like what you heard, this has been the House of Pod. If you liked it, don't forget to subscribe to The Present Illness. Leave us a review if you can, and tell your friends or your primary care doc or people on the street. We welcome anyone. All fans welcome. Yeah.
All the people. And if you want to find us, you can find us on all the places. We're on Blue Sky. We're on TikTok. We're on Instagram. You can find Arghavan at Arghavan Salles, MD, PhD. You can also find her at Arghavan Salles, MD. I am at Alyssa Burgart or Burgart Bioethics with an X at the end. And, we try to post some smart stuff. Occasionally we post some spicy takes. We're both on Substack. Come find us. It's not hard. Do a Google search. You can find us.
You can find us. And The Present Illness also has its own TikTok and Instagram, and perhaps we will expand to other places. But for now, you can follow The Present Illness on these socials. And in the meantime, we will be back next week with more headlines, hot takes, and doom scrolling wrapped with some laughs.
So until then, folks, agitate, hydrate, make sure you take a nap. Sleep is so good. And we will see you next time on The Present Illness. And don't forget, listen, do not take medical advice from random people on the internet. That is just general, important things to think about. This show is for information purposes. It is meant to be fun. It is certainly not medical advice. Please take your medical questions to a qualified professional. We want you to get the care you deserve.